Welcome, everyone. My name is Rohan Kulkarni. I'm the head of education at Soulpepper, and we are currently situated in Dagarondo, which is known as the gathering place on the Dish with One Spoon territory. Community conversations like this one would not have been possible without the generous support of our sponsor, TD. TD and the TD Ready Commitment have been important partners in supporting our work at Soulpepper around radical inclusion, including this important forum for civic dialogue and discussion that connects to the work on our stages. I'm so happy that you've all joined us and are listening in to this community conversation titled The Cost of Love, that looks at the various ways in which we think about economics surrounding romantic relationships, and in celebration of The Ex Boyfriend Yard Sale by the talented Haley McGee. So, our panelists today are accomplished professionals who've spent much of their careers thinking about and working with this idea of the cost of love. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome here Noelle Perdue, Kevin Caspersz, and Haley McGee. So I'm just going to do a quick intro of each of them. So to my left here, I have Kevin Caspersz, who has completed his Bachelor of Science honors in psychology in 2000 at Queen's University in Kingston, and completed his Juris Doctorate in 2004 at Ave Maria School of Law in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Kevin was called to the New York State Bar in 2005 and to the bar in Ontario in 2008. Kevin has represented clients in family law since 2013 at all levels of court in Ontario, including the Ontario Court of Appeal. He's been asked to discuss a variety of family law issues for several media outlets. You may have seen him on BNN, CB24, City News, Global News, CBC Canada Tonight, Law Times, and the Toronto Star. Then we have Noelle. Noelle Perdue is a writer, speaker, internet porn historian, and artist with a background in computer science, journalism, and digital production for high-volume mainstream, experimental, and independent porn industries. From moderation to artificial intelligence, she believes that talking about uncomfortable, intimate, and even, or especially the sordid aspects of digital history is necessary to understand and influence our collective future. And finally, we have Haley McGee, who you've gotten to know very well over the past hour and a half. But just to give a little bit of a blurb on Haley as well, she's an internationally acclaimed, award-winning, multidisciplinary artist who specializes in live performance, and the live performance work spans solo performance, acting, writing, installation, voiceover, and improv comedy. As a writer, she's developed new work for the Battersea Arts Centre, Camden People's Theatre, the Stratford Festival of Canada, Banff Playwrights Colony, and the Tarragon Theatre. She's received commissions from Camden's People's Theatre, Wilderness Festival, and Common Boots Theatre. Haley holds a BFA in acting from the Toronto Metropolitan University. Originally, she's from Kitchener-Waterloo, but now she lives in London, UK. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm gonna get started with just asking Noelle. First question for Noelle. Noelle, could you give us a little bit of a background on who you are? Tell us a little bit about your area of work and how you've encountered this concept of the cost of love over the years. And maybe what were your thoughts watching this performance?
Definitely. My background, as the bio suggested, is mostly in the porn industry. I was working in the mainstream porn industry for several years and recently left to do independent work and freelance writing. A lot of my work is about the porn industry. I found that while I was working in it, there was a huge gap of understanding between consumers or the general public and the actual porn industry. And a lot of this was because the porn industry is very insular for good reason, for mostly for safety. But there just wasn't a lot of information being shared outside of the industry itself. And I think that that really affected and still affects the ways people engage with pornography, their understandings of pornography, their discomfort around porn. So a lot of my work has to do with kind of untangling that discomfort and that misunderstanding, or where that misunderstanding comes from, or where that discomfort comes from, and assessing what is a necessary discomfort, what is an unnecessary discomfort. So, and I think the cost of love is a really interesting concept also because I guess a lot of what I work with is intimacy, which is related to love. And definitely working in the porn industry, it's all about sort of trying to um, assess new positions of intimacy and what people want out of intimacy, and maybe something that could be a new intimacy that people haven't thought of yet, maybe in a new fetish or in a new combination or what have you. And if you can kind of find this new intimacy, then you're rich. And that's sort of everybody's desire. Um, so that was really interesting. And I think that there's also kind of with the formula that you laid out, there's a lot of overlap with how the sex work industry works, where there's the sex work industry, but the more intimate an experience is, the more valuable it is. And we find that very explicitly in kind of full service, where you can pay more for a girlfriend experience, or you can pay more for an overnight, or something like a point of view pornography piece will be worth more to people because it inspires that feeling of intimacy, which is what a lot of people desire out of that experience. So I think that it was really interesting. There was a lot of genuine overlap, which was great.
That's great. Can't wait to hear more. Let's as we dig in. Kevin, my question for you is, could you give us a little bit of a background in family law? What is it? The type? What are the types of cases that you're encountering that sort of speak to this idea of the cost of love? And just yeah, giving us a little bit of reaction of what you thought watching this performance based on your professional experience.
Um, I guess I'm constantly uh, involved in evaluating the cost of love. That's almost my job on a daily basis. If you think of it broadly, I could almost say the consequence of love, because I sort of come in, when that has ended for whatever reason, by one person or the other in the relationship. So um, the performance is very relevant to me in watching someone trying to take into account all the factors from her relationships in now, let's say, subjectively now quantifying these items, which again is sort of my job. I have a lot of guidance through that, through statutes and common law, because obviously the courts and the governance wants to make sure that there's an objective quantification for anyone who goes through this process. But knowing that or being aware of that is one thing, and going through it yourself, with those emotional factors, with those experiences from the relationship, is what makes the evaluating the cost of love, the cost of or the consequence of love, as I was kind of saying, difficult. And so I'm always trying to get my clients through that process. I mean, I'm going to have that experience more where there is a division of assets, because I deal with a broad range of cases. I know I was referred to as a divorce lawyer. We sort of go by family lawyer, because not to correct you or anything, but just because the scope of my practice is so broad, and there's so many different family issues. It could be grandparents trying to see a grandchild, and of course, that's very different from, say, like a relationship and a division of those assets. But the cases that deal with a relationship that then accumulated possessions, and now how do we deal with these things? Um, it's very important and very hard sometimes to explain to clients, you know, you have to treat this way, or think about what this is really worth, and take out not only how maybe you came about to have this possession, but what's tied to it, which could also be animosity, anger, um, this bitterness, these kinds of things. So really starting to segment those things to help clients get through that process in terms of um, evaluating the cost of love and their possessions in doing so.
I'm really interested just hearing the fact that you're talking about helping your clients through this process. How is it for you when they are trying to have these when you are trying to have these conversations, these difficult conversations? Um, is your role as a lawyer also include, you know, how does it affect you?
Well, like I said, I'm always trying to balance, what the client is trying to achieve, whether it be, simply make their way through the separation and a divorce, what they're entitled to under the law, etc. But also, having a lawyer is expensive. The process of divorce, the process of separation is expensive, and I acknowledge that. So I have to sometimes, it is frustrating, Rohan. It is can be frustrating because you have that underlying emotion that the client might not necessarily even, you know, he's not having the spatula. I refuse. I have cooked breakfast too many times with that spatula, and I'm not letting him have it. But what is it really about the spatula? No, it's not about the spatula that you can just go and get another one. But yeah, I have to try and explain that because it's not worth the fight. It's not worth incurring legal fees. It's not worth, et cetera, mediation, court over the spatula. So it is that it can be frustrating at times, and it's been a learning curve for me going through family law, figuring out different techniques, different analogies for my clients to help them understand that, even though they might not even know why they're wanting an item or refusing to give up an item, or if as the case may be.
Super. You want to add something?
How much do you think is lawyering, and how much do people try to put you into the therapist role?
Good question.
And how do you cope with that?
Um, I sort of I certainly have to know where my boundaries are, and sometimes people just want to be heard. Some of my clients just want to be heard, so at least they know I have an understanding of what they want, why they want it, and in knowing that, okay, now tell me what your advice is, right? So I do have to play a little bit of a therapist in terms of hearing them, understanding um, why they may tell me to do something. Really fight for this spatula, really fight for the master bedroom set, really fight for this piece of art, whatever it is. It's um, sometimes it's important for me to often it's times for me to important to understand that, and in that process maybe they come to the realization, okay, I'm just fighting for the sake of fighting, or I come to understand why they really want that thing and say, okay, if it's worth the fight to you, I'm very happy to go and go after it. And so in that respect, I do have to play a little bit of therapist, hear what they have to say and delve into that a bit so I have a better understanding in order to effectively represent them.
Amazing. All right, Haley, finally over to you. Could you walk us through, you've talked about extensively in the show how you sort of started this journey. Uh, could you walk us through the genesis of turning this dilemma you were having about the cost of things that were left behind into a play, and where you've kind of gone with that over the last 4 years?
Well, it really did start the way I start the show, which is walking to the bank and having this thought about, gosh, maybe I could sell myself. Maybe that could be a way to make money. And then thinking like, no, 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 that's not for me. And having this moment on the phone with Visa saying, I'm going to sell some things, and looking around and realizing all those things were, items that had been given to me by various people that I dated. And from there, I started thinking, ooh, wouldn't that be a cool show? Or wouldn't that be actually no, that's not true. I'm leaving out a step. Then I thought, well, I'll put them all on Craigslist. Yeah, Gumtree. And I will I'll do these, I'll eke out lots of emotional context, and I'll see, and it'll be kind of like an art project on Gumtree. And then I was talking about this with a friend, and she was like, and then I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll make it as a one off show where I auction off gifts from my exes. And she was like, why would you make it a one off show? Make it a show that you can perform over and over and over, and do it live. Like, don't do an online piece of art. You're a good live performer, do it live. And so that really got me going on the path of making a show. And then I talked to a theater company about it, and I sort of blurted out all my ideas. And I said, and I'll interview my exes, and I'll interview these experts. And they were like, that sounds great. We're really excited about the idea that you're going to interview your exes and play recordings of that in the show. And so I sort of then had to do it and was sort of white knuckling it through writing these emails to my exes and trying to track them down. And yeah, so it was all sort of, it came about very organically. Yeah.
And the part about the experts, I mean, we have a panel of experts here.
Yes.
How did that sort of factor into your mind? Like, oh, I have to talk to these people who've done things professionally to get my hands around this, this concept.
My mom's a scientist. She's a molecular biologist, and my dad's an English professor. And so I've just grown up in a house where there's a lot of, if you're going to talk about a topic, you've got to do your research properly. And so I think there's some fun in that for me, or some kind of comfort in that. And so yeah, in addition to doing this kind of like personal digging, I was really curious to do some, more academic digging into some of these things, into economic concepts and theories, and bringing that to the show. And I mean, the typewriter interview, he accuses me of it. It's dangerous to make it just about you. And I think somewhere in me, I was looking for things that would help me to transcend my own story and talk about love and relationships and heartbreak in ways that might feel more universal. And so some of those concepts like sunk cost bias, the way we feel in relationships. Oh, I've already put in 6 years. Am I really going to end it now when I've already sunk these years into this dynamic? Yeah. So I thought there were a lot of parallels that would resonate with people, and so I wanted to keep them in the show.
Great. And as you hopefully keep writing the show, we've also introduced you to more experts. If you ever want to say hi, have a coffee.
Oh my God.
They have some really interesting perspectives to bring.
Yes.
Great. So, Noelle, I just want to ask, in Canada, the porn industry, it generates $3 billion annually. Yeah. So when we are talking about the cost of love, we can't sort of ignore the sex work industry. So what are some ethics that you consider and integrate into your work?
I feel like the concept of ethics around sex work is very broad, and there are a lot of different ways that could be approached. Ultimately, the question of ethics in sex work is pretty simple. It's about ethics of labor, and also kind of it's made more complicated by the fact that the labor itself is stigmatized, and through that stigma is made more dangerous. But ultimately, it is a question of labor ethics. The labor just happens to be sexual. So I think in my personal practice, a lot of my work has to do with uh, what it gets defined as obscene versus what gets defined as maybe erotic, or exciting or experimental or boundary pushing, and why that is, and where those labels come from, and where that feeling of discomfort comes from, and who it gets applied to, which I think ultimately is the big question about it. Because something like, for example, HBO or Game of Thrones had a lot of full frontal nudity, a lot of extremely explicit scenes that were really kind of celebrated in media, and a lot of it could be defined very simply as pornographic. When I was writing, I was a scriptwriter for pornography for many years, and at some points I wrote what is called softcore porn, which is that there's full frontal, but there's no explicit penetration shown, and it's what shows at hotels and things like that. And something like Game of Thrones or Bridgerton season 1 could very simply be defined as softcore pornography, just in terms of the definition of softcore pornography and what we see on the screen. That is softcore porn. But also, there have been many interviews with the actors and with the directors of these shows that have been very offended at the concept of their work being defined as pornography, which is really interesting. And then also I see, people in art school presenting things that are simply porn, and but it's because it's in this different space, in this academic space, in this moneyed space, um, in this institutional space, it's seen as art, which is different from pornography. And that's also something that we see um, come up a lot in legislation, this issue of what is obscene and what is artistic. And we keep trying to kind of draw this line, this definition of this is actually obscenity, but this is okay, and we've never been able to do it, and it's an ongoing battle. And ultimately, it's because the line just doesn't exist, and obscenity is an entirely personal experience, shaped by our culture as a whole. So, I think that that's kind of how I integrate ethics into my personal work of, well, who is who this gets applied to, this kind of policing, or this, um, I guess, what gets shown and what gets celebrated versus what gets censored.
And speaking of obscenity and the cost associated with it, you're talking about these big budget productions with HBO that in your words are softcore porn. Um, how do you see sort of the economics of that as well? Like, you have pornography, an industry on its own, and then you have what we consider mainstream, and that is more acceptable and not considered obscene. What do you see, sort of, any observations on that?
I mean, I think that in kind of the 70s and 80s, the mainstream entertainment industry and the pornographic entertainment industry um, operated sort of in parallel, where things would be produced very similarly with similar budgets. The mode of production was very similar, where there would be somebody who wrote it. I mean, there's still somebody that writes it. It was me. But there would be a full script writer. There would be somebody that did music production for the entire thing. There were many, many actors. They were all paid quite, for the time, quite well. And then it would be released sort of there would be a formal release in theaters. Um, and and now it's very, very different, where internet pornography exists largely on the internet, and does not have access to the same budgets as it once did. And the production process has really been limited to, when I was doing script writing, I was actually doing kind of everything, where I would be script writing, I would be doing casting, I would be doing wardrobe, I would be doing set design, I would be doing ordering all the props. Like, there's really ultimately maybe 4 people now that go into even a large, um, kind of like a big budget porn scene for something like Brazzers, is has changed a lot.
Super interesting. All right, Kevin, like we're I just want you to walk us through the nitty gritty of what it is like to evaluate sentimental value when you're going through a legal process. You've alluded to it a little bit, but I'd love to just hear more about that, because so much of this play is, it's an hour and a half exploration and delving into every single aspect of how we can attribute value to something that has an emotional connection. Um, from a legal perspective, what is that process like?
Well, unfortunately, I'm going to have to disappoint you. There, because I that is a process that doesn't really exist other than what I've already talked about, and it's one that's probably purposely avoided, because it can lead to protracting litigation, protracting conflict if we start to ask questions like, how do you feel about this item? How do you feel about dealing with the home in this fashion? Right? We try to keep it very subjective, and any sentiment um, or evaluation of sentiment is simply done between counsel and client. Like I said, to say, okay, you're really fighting really hard for this particular thing. What do I need to know? Oh, it was given to me by my grandmother, or given to me by in this circumstance as an engagement present, or whatever the case may be, for me to kind of understand why the client desires it so much, and how much I should be, chasing this thing. But then that does become a discussion with the client where sometimes I have to say, I have to do that cost benefit analysis. That genuine cost benefit analysis is of how much is this item worth, right? Just the plain monetary value on the open market. How much does it increase based on your desire for it and the sentiment attached to it? And then how much are you willing to spend to get that item? So it's not as complex, obviously, as the equation that you put up, or maybe it is, but it just happens in a compressed, right? Because asking someone, how important is this item to you? Maybe as humans and the way we process emotion, maybe we go through that process.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like subconsciously in an instant.
Yeah.
Like that means the world to me. And we've just done everything you did on stage.
Yeah.
Without even really breaking it down like you did. Maybe I just was, maybe we do that subconsciously, and then we spit out, I must have this item.
Yeah.
It has infinite value to me, or whatever the case may be. I'm willing to spend, $20,000 in legal fees, even though it's a, I don't know, $10,000 item. I don't know, but somehow we do that math instinctively based on how we feel about something, right? And then respond. So I let them sort of go through that process and say, at the end of the day, I take instruction from my client, or my clients, but I need them to really do that evaluation. Maybe not as an extended exercise as you performed on stage, but now talking about it, it probably does happen to some extent, either very quickly, or they say, let me take some time to think about it. And they come to terms with the idea that, okay, you know what, I'm going to let this item go. And, I liked that part of your performance. I thought it was actually critical that you went back to talk to your previous partners. And I wondered if, maybe you thought, this bike is so important to me, or this typewriter holds this value. And I wonder if that changed after you had those discussions.
Well, absolutely. The necklace, I've moved the necklace 8 times. I moved it from all the different apartments I lived in Toronto. I moved so many times when I first moved to the UK. I was moving this necklace around, and then I feeling like, oh, I was kind of this albatross. Oh, this expensive gift that someone gave me for my 19th birthday. And then I talked to him, and he was like, I gotta tell you, I don't remember the necklace. I don't remember buying it. Apparently, he called his mom before our conversation to say, like, Mom, do you remember anything about this necklace? And no one remembered it. And then I started thinking, did he even give me the necklace? And he did. I know he did. But it really, and then I had conversations where people would say, oh, yeah, this scarf that you gave me. I'd say, what scarf? And this way that, some of these things that we live with the object, so it has meaning to us, but the other person is totally, the person who's given it, the person who actually spent the money, has totally forgotten it. And so I felt quite light after I realized he wasn't thinking about the necklace at all. Yeah.
And I was surprised to hear the details about the necklace.
Yeah.
Diamond, sapphire. Yeah. I was actually surprised by that. And then the age at which you had received it.
I know. And so it had been a real effort to buy that for me.
Yet he didn't remember.
Yeah, he didn't remember.
I like your rose-colored tint index.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if there were any experiences that had the opposite effect, where you're like, this dick.
Oh yeah. When I talked to them, it was like, woof. There was a few that I avoided talking to. So I think maybe I would have had that experience had I spoken to them. But yeah, so I talked to 5 of the 8 for the show. And so the 5 that I talked to, it was all pretty positive. They were pretty far in the past. Okay. Yeah, I spared myself the ew.
That's good.
Yeah.
So Kevin, you actually didn't disappoint at all. That was a wonderful, very insightful answer. Thank you. So Haley, this is a bit of a longer question, but you started writing the show 4 years ago. Am I correct? Or longer?
Started writing it in 2017.
Okay, so 5 years
Yeah.
now. so your relationships, your income at that time, everything was very different. I follow you on Instagram. Everyone should follow Haley on Instagram at yes Haley McGee. And based on what I heard in the show and what I've seen on your Instagram, you've actually now successfully entered the real estate market.
I have, but it's not a £2 million
Yeah.
house. Yes. So I wrote the show in 2017 when I was in debt and heartbroken and things were not going well in my career. And so the show's really about that period in my life. Also, I was supposed to perform this in 2020 at Soulpepper, and it's been rescheduled twice. So things have really changed in the intervening years. And one of the things I mentioned it briefly in the show, but I do commercial voiceover work, and I've had very good run becoming the voice of many brands. I do the voice of Dove deodorant in the United States. I do the voice. I was the voice of Stella Artois for a year. Anyway, so I do this. I have this like commercial stream of my life now, which was not something that was happening when I was writing the show, and it's meant that I could buy a flat in London. Yes.
So
Sadly, not a £2 million house, but a flat.
we'll get there. We'll get
Yeah.
there. But
Which
with
is
all of that in
amazing.
mind,
Yeah.
you're now you continue to develop this show,
Yeah.
and you're asking all these questions about about relationships and developing this formula for the cost of love. How does that process and your income and your life being what it is now compared to when you started writing the show, how does that change your perspective on maybe current relationships or perhaps anticipating a future relationship, a future breakup, because you have this really tangible asset that you have to think about?
So I started doing online dating in the pandemic for the first time doing online dating. And it was like, oh, what are you working on? Or what do you do? Oh, I'm a writer and performer. What are you working on? I'm writing a book. What's it called? The Ex-Boyfriend Yard Sale. What's it about? Well, it's about how I tried to get out of credit card debt from selling things from my exes. And it was an amazing litmus test of who would go out with me and who wouldn't. And so, so yeah, I do have a boyfriend who's a he's an audio he's an audio engineer and he does oil painting as well. And so he thought it sounded fun and he was up for it. And he doesn't feature in the show, but he is campaigning for. He was like, and then you need to write a book about how you fell in love and made it work with someone after doing the ex-boyfriend yard sale. I think I'm done writing about my personal life for a while.
Great.
Yeah.
So Noelle, I'm coming back to you. So as you've kind of alluded to this a little bit, but as an internet porn historian, um, how have you witnessed the change and the growth in this industry as it relates to cost?
Interesting. As it relates to cost, it's definitely been quite a few decades for the porn industry in terms of shaking things up. As I said, kind of in quote unquote the golden age of porn, it operated in parallel with the mainstream film industry in many ways. And now, pornography as a whole, I mean, in many ways, it was never valued socially, but now it has been financially devalued quite a lot. Um, Mostly because the internet made it extremely accessible and it kind of went in a similar direction to the music industry actually is a very good parallel where something like LimeWire and then all the streaming services that we all know pay very little to the artists. But as a whole, pornography has been devalued both in terms of what people are looking for, the scale of something, of what people are looking for. People want things that are very accessible, immediate, short form, uh, and and they do not want to pay for them generally. However, that was I think most true 2010 to 2018, I would say, in my rough estimation. And now, the kind of new interest that people have is ethics as a concept, similar to many industries where people want to feel good about what they're consuming. And there's been a lot of conversation in the media about the porn industry generally. I will say I specify ethics as a concept because I do not see a lot of people backing that interest up with actual action. um, and what we're seeing as a result is a lot of kind of hmm, ethics washing of the porn industry without a lot of actual change. So we have something like, for example, a porn company opened in 2000 in I think 17 called Bellesa that marketed itself as a feminist porn company and built its entire brand on being a feminist porn company. And there were many articles written about it, being like, we're so excited, finally a feminist porn company. And it actually was an aggregate site, so the entirety of it was pirated. So it wasn't ethical, but because it called itself a feminist company, because it put ethics in its branding, felt really good about that, and they wanted to engage with it. Also, if if people feel uncomfortable, I have a lot of conversations where people feel uncomfortable about the porn industry and they want to talk about their discomfort with me, which I'm generally patient with. but many conversations I have, people are uncomfortable and they're like, well, I don't know if it's ethical. And I'm like, well, how do you engage with pornography? Like, what kind of porn stars are you interested? What kind of performers are you interested in? Who are you following? And they can't answer those questions. And ultimately, if people want to engage ethically with the porn industry, they have to actually engage with the people in the porn industry, and they have to actually engage with sex workers, and they have to engage directly with the labor, and they have to, actually take an interest in the performers they're watching beyond the 3-minute clip, which requires investment both economically and also kind of with discomfort. And sometimes people
An
don't wanna,
emotional cost.
yeah, there is an emotional cost, I think, because it requires people to unpack and engage with an industry that might provoke some uncomfortable feelings. Um, but yes, people are interested in ethics lately. I would love if that interest translated more into um, how they actually engage with the people in it.
Great. So Kevin, my final question for you is, in your career so far, I'm sure you've been privy to a lot of messy breakups and a lot of finances involved in these messy breakups. So you've seen it all. What advice do you have for people in the room as we enter into new relationships, or if we want to evaluate our current relationships?
This is just for you, Rohan.
I'm on this whole exercise. Yes, I want to get an answer to this question.
What is my advice? I
Prenup?
yeah, it's not a bad idea. It's not a I encourage it. Again, if we can try to separate the monetary, right, or material aspect of a relationship from the emotional and the emotional and personal aspect of the relationship, I think that's a great idea, right? So I mean, we've always heard the idea that oh, if you if you're talking about a prenup, are you setting yourself up for failure? Are you already considering that this is not going to work, or there's going to be a breakup or whatever? But think of it this way: when we put our seatbelts on in a car, are we anticipating? Are we expecting that we're going to crash or have an accident? No, it's a precaution, right? It's a precaution to, let's say, avoid the worst. So I think that's how we have to think of prenuptial agreements, cohabitation agreements. You know, everything's great now. We're going to do this thing, whether it be live together, marriage. Maybe it'll work out. We want it to work out. That's obviously why we're engaging in this way and going down this path, but it may not. And so let's do something. Let's create an instrument so that when that happens, we don't have to have that battle. We don't have to go through that emotional turmoil trying to figure this all out because we figured it out already at the best of times when we were ready to start this journey, right? And with so much hope and positivity, we were getting along. You want the spatula? No, you keep the spatula. Let me put that term in. You take the spatula if we separate, right? So then at when you come to that point where it's not going to be ideal to negotiate, it's not because you have that emotional um, um, background at that point, that conflict. You don't have a choice. You reach into that drawer, as we say, when you do a prenup, do the prenup, do it properly. Have a lawyer retained, disclose all your assets, talk about what the plan is, and then take that piece of paper and put it in a drawer and hope you never have to use it again. But it's there, right? You hope you never have to see it again, but it's there. So if that time comes, if that accident happens, you're wearing your seatbelt, right? And you can walk away from that accident as scot free as possible. So that's sort of why we don't think of it as you're putting a downer or you're setting yourself up for failure. You're just taking precautions, and no one can ever say that taking precautions are bad. Obviously, when someone's coming into a relationship with more assets, there's an imbalance, a financial imbalance. We always encourage that. And I think it also kind of takes a bit of the pressure off the relationship to, maybe you were talking about, you've invested so much time in this. I got to stick it out. Or if I leave now, I'm not going to walk away with enough, or I'm going to have to give up more. It's already fixed. It's done, right? So that you don't have that. I know what's going to happen. I'm checking out. I'm not going to put myself through this anymore. So prenups, cohabitation agreements, always a good idea. Um, you know, that's really what we try to encourage to anyone that is comes to us with that kind of question. Hey, I'm going into this situation. What should I do? That's certainly the first thing that we encourage as a safety precaution, if you
Noted.
will.
Yeah, I was gonna say like I really hear you, Kevin. I really do, and I understand.
But
But I think there's so much stigma
you're right.
around this idea of a prenup, and it also is a fundamental question in your show, Haley, which is why am I going through like I'm going through this exercise to evaluate the cost of love, but I keep falling in love over and over because in that moment that's what like it's about feelings.
Mm.
And don't you get into relationships because of feelings? So
But that's exactly the point. No, but that's exactly the point. Think about that, right? Because if you're signing a prenup, you are in fact getting into that relationship based on feelings. I only care about this person, not their things,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, that's what it's saying, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I do think, this is one of the big things I've learned in therapy. It's like, how do I feel around this person is the best barometer for if you should stay with someone or not. And it's like, how do I feel in their company? Not are they impressive? Because I think for a long time I would go out with people who I was very impressed by, but who weren't necessarily the best company. And this has been a real kind of shift in my values. Um, and I think, like, in a very typical, you know, basic, I almost want to say like old world way. I'm gonna make a generalization about heterosexual men wanting to date like really beautiful women. But I think for me it was like, oh, I want to date people who are really smart or really funny or really talented. But just like you can't date the good looks, you can't date certain attributes. All you really have is like, how do I actually feel when I'm in this person's company? And it's been a very slow kind of turning of the ship for me in getting into that mode. And so it's like a new way of being in touch with my feelings and a new kind of feeling to follow in in love.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Has this process changed the way you give gifts to partners?
It's such a good question. Yes. Yes, because I'm thinking too about, yeah, what is a good gift? And it's so much about what it says about how you see the other person and that you've been paying attention to the other person, not giving them a gift for the person you wish they were, but giving them a gift for the person they are or the thing that they've been hankering after but haven't treated themselves to. Yeah.
this is great. I mean, part of my curiosity, Haley, always after watching the show, is just like thinking about you, and you kind of really done such a deep dive. You've looked into the sun in some ways, and how do you ever go back from that? So it's a real pleasure to just hear you talking about reaching these different places while also keeping the space for the show and all the messiness of it that you've gone through. Um, yeah. And speaking of feelings, I'm really feeling like we should open up this panel to some questions from our audience, our lovely audience. Oh wow, the hand went right up. So we'll start with you.
I'm so curious about the to and fro that you may or may not have had with Jewelry Box, Swan Lake. Will never hear that in the same way ever again. Was there more of an exchange after?
No.
Okay.
And that's it. I talked to the lawyer and they were like, you're fine. You're fine. I also rewrote the letter. So I'm not using his actual words. I've taken some artistic liberties with the note.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you feel more powerful in writing that character and putting it to bed?
I did. I felt really scared though when I got it. I thought, oh my gosh, do I have to stop this whole project? I was really scared. I write about it in the book, actually, how that moment affected me. But yes, I managed to get some good legal advice and carry on. And it feels good now, too. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, in the back over there.
So first, a comment to Haley. I love the way when you ended it, it was about everyone has value. So there was that message of hope that really resonated with me, because at the end of relationships, you feel like shit.
Yeah.
So the question then to the other two panelists are, first, when people are breaking up, how do they see their own value, and is it diminished based on their relationships? And then for individuals in the sex industry, based on the stigma, how do they see themselves, and what is your recommendation so that we can all encourage them to be more positive?
Questions of self-worth.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting one. I think where I come into play, I feel like people immediately start quantifying. Right? You know now that this relationship has ended. I want this, I want that, what do I want to take? Right? That's sort of the knee-jerk reaction. So, and how is that going to be equal or unequal? And then you're right, it starts to move towards self-value, and then maybe who was more important in the relationship? How do you quantify that? I'm entitled to this. They are not entitled to that. And that's a very dangerous place to go as part of that contemplation, right? I really think it's important to, if you are going through that process, to sort of draw the line where at material things, like I said, you should certainly assign your value to things and how much they mean to you, but starting to go into the idea of maybe someone was more valuable in the relationship, or I was more valuable, they were more valuable. It's interesting you asked that, because I started to think if anyone if I've ever had a client that came in and was just, no, I didn't do anything, I was worthless, just give them everything. And I've never had that. Right? I'm just realizing that with that question, it's always, I did this, I did so much. Yes, he went or she went every day and earned, income for the family, but I did all these. It's almost like they start to build up their self-worth and contribution in anticipation of this fight or whatever is going to happen. So that question is interesting. It really got me thinking, but I think the reaction from people that are about to go through this process is, well, I think I brought a lot. I think they start doing the list of how much they did and what does that amount to, and what does that entitle them to, because they're getting ready to make, start that process where they're quantifying and quantifying what they want, and maybe valuing their entitlement. Right. So that's a good question.
I think it speaks to Noelle's point of the asshole glasses in comparison to the rose-colored glasses.
I mean, I cannot speak for everybody in the adult industry, nor would I want to. I also occupy a position of extreme comfort. Kind of, I left the adult industry and now write about it, and I am lucky enough to be published and recognized by a lot of institutions that are very respectable in the most kind of traditional sense. So I occupy a lot of privilege, and I simply cannot speak to all sex workers and their experiences. However, I will say that most people in the industry have very high self-worth. It takes, I think, a great deal of self-respect and confidence to be able to have the boundaries required to be in the adult industry. I think that I would have no advice for people in the industry, but I have advice for people outside of it. And I think it's not an issue of people in the industry and their perception of self. I think it's an issue of people outside of it and their perception of pornography or their perception of sex work. Even I think in the show, it was really interesting when in the beginning you said, oh, well, maybe I'll get someone to pay to have sex with me. And there was a lot of uncomfortable laughter, which was interesting because, I mean, it's just, you could do that. I don't, it's not ridiculous. And so I think for if anybody in the room uncomfortably laughed, my advice would be to think about what about that was funny or what about that was ridiculous, because maybe it's the fact that you're watching this person in a large institution who maybe you wouldn't expect, or maybe that's not the direction this play is going in, or maybe just the concept of sex work made you uncomfortable. I have no idea, but maybe that's something that you can unpack later on.
We'll take one final question. All right.
My question is for Haley. I feel like part of the play that I was like so curious about was whether or not, I guess, people that you wrote about that were involved in any of your exes that you wrote about or weren't written about in this play. Was there any kind of discussion or dispute about like, can I have this back actually? Or like, especially with the sapphire necklace, when you were kind of talking about, were they like, oh, I don't remember that, but can I actually, can you?
I did say to him, like, should I sell it and split the money with you? And he was like, no. I completely forgot. No one asked for anything back who's in the show, but someone who I dated very briefly, who had given me a whole bunch of books and inscribed them, reached out to me when he saw that I was doing the show and said, like, please don't include the books with my signature in them in the show. I'll pay you for them.
Oh, wow.
And I wrote back and just said, don't worry. I'm not looking to expose anybody. I'm not going to put your books in the show or have your name in the show. Yeah, but yeah, most people were very, I mean, like I said, I was a little bit crafty about who I reached out to and who I didn't. But yeah, most people were very cool with it and very fine with me using the items. Yeah.
Did it start with a lot of items and you narrowed it down?
Yeah.
No, it started with the expensive ones, like the bike and the necklace and the typewriter, things that would have value. And then my childhood best friend said, well, you've got to include the CD and you've got to include the t-shirt because you can't make a show about your exes and not include those relationships. And so that was part of the thing too of, okay, the objects look worthless, but the story,
but the story adds value to them. And so, yeah, that was how the exercise kind of ballooned. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for being such a wonderful and generous audience, and thank you to our panelists,
Thank you so
Haley,
much.
Noelle, Kevin, for joining us. I just want to say once again, thank you to TD Ready Commitment for their support of these community conversations at Soulpepper. If you want to check out the remainder of our community conversations that we've done all year long, they are on our website at soulpepper.ca. So with that, thanks everyone. Have a great afternoon and take care.